Okay, so bless you, Michaela.
Yep, it's recording.
Yeah.
Oh, you can. Oh, yeah. Well, I need you to hang around, Leonardo. You can probably help me with my email and all this other stuff. That's
An administrative assistant. Yep, yep.
Yeah, that's what you were hoping to get out of this education, right?
yeah. It's interesting. I'm partway through it. My daughter told me to read it. I wouldn't read it. The book's titled "It's Not You, It's the Workplace."
Oh, I haven't heard of that. Oh,
And but it's interesting the different expectations different people from different cultures have for their career,
yeah.
and the different stereotypes that are attached to different people from different cultures. And yeah, it is interesting. I wouldn't have read it if anybody but my daughter recommended it. But so, did you get that picture of your new dog loaded?
No, I didn't even try. I admit I had to hook up my wife's Apple TV. That's what I did since I saw you an hour ago.
I don't believe you really have a dog. I think you just made it up.
No, I don't have a dog. I have two.
So you guys that are here, now I'm gonna give an extra point for people that turn their cameras on. I ordered them to turn them on this morning and that didn't work. So I'll try bribery this afternoon. Oh, look at that face, Nico. I can see why you had it off. Anyway, some years ago, Dave had agreed to speak to my class, to Kim's class and my class, and he canceled on us because he got a chance to go to the Westminster Dog Show, which was one of the items on his bucket list. So, you know, you guys may think that I have a lot of pull and influence to get somebody like Dave to speak to you, but I'm second to, I'm a distant second to dogs. I know that.
Well, and that may have been the first of about 3 times that I went to the dog show, because it was addictive. So it was very fun.
I know. Well, yeah, it was. You were taking it off your bucket list, so I assume it was the first time. But
yeah, yeah, that's so funny because we only get rescue dogs, and they're always mixed breeds, and yeah, so we're totally not purebred dog people at all. But the dog show was. It was fascinating.
Was that New York?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It had been up until the pandemic. It was always at Madison Square Garden. They've been doing it in different venues and different times of the year since the pandemic hit. So it kind of changed it up.
We're waiting. Does
Oh,
anybody have any questions they want? Doesn't have to be about accounting. It can be about dogs.
I tried to, before the last class started, I tried to load a picture, but just a week ago, we adopted a second dog. He's a 9-year-old golden retriever with some health issue. And I tried to load a picture of him, but I could only get it on my computer screen sideways. So I didn't think that was ideal. But he looks like a 9-year-old golden, and he's very sweet and nice.
What is your other dog?
He's an 11-year-old poodle mix. He's about 25 pounds probably, but looks like he's a poodle Bichon. If you know what a Bichon Frise is, it's a poodly like dog. So he's like a medium sized white curly thing.
Got it.
But
My family. Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say my family. I was kind of sad because a week before I moved back here for school, my family got in a puppy. They got a golden retriever.
Oh, geez.
So that was hard because I did not want to leave the puppy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny. Somebody asked this question last time, but over the years, we've adopted, I don't know, 8 or 10 dogs. We've never have had a puppy, in part because I don't know if I could handle all the energy and the destruction. And
It was a lot. I got to take care of him for the week that I was there with him. He has a lot of energy.
yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and they don't have any manners, when you get them.
No, I don't.
So Christy, our oldest daughter, rescued a dog from South Carolina. She was in Arlington, Virginia. It's a long story, but she rescued her dogs from South Carolina, and she was living on the 16th floor of an apartment. And all those issues Dave mentioned about a puppy came to fruition. I told her it was the stupidest thing she ever did. It turned out to be really good for her. And Patty and I inherited it when we realized that the 16th floor was less than ideal. And that's probably the best thing that's happened to us in quite a few years.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. How old is that dog now? Ted?
Six.
Oh, okay.
And he doesn't mind any better now than
No, no. Yeah.
we spent money for doggy college, and but as Dave reminded me this morning, my students don't mind me either, so I don't know why I'd expect my puppy to.
That's right. Well, yeah, that's in most cases, dog issues are not dog issues. They're people issues.
Yeah, who was the Caesar? The dog whisperer.
Caesar Milan, yeah.
Yeah, and I heard him say once, isn't it amazing? You see some homeless guy walking with his dog, no leash, no anything. The dog stays right with him. You see the CEO of a company, and he can't get his dog to mind at all. So
Right. Yeah.
okay, so I think it's about that time. First of all, let me check my notes. There were two things. I did make a co-host, I think.
Okay.
I sent out an email this morning with an attachment for Dave's going to use a slide that's hard to see on Canvas, so I sent you all the attachment. If you turn your camera on, which I think you should do just out of courtesy, but if you'll get a point. You'll get a point just for seeing your face. So I think you should do it out of courtesy, but I'll bribe you. And so anyway, Dave is a Cal Poly alum. He corrected me this morning. He graduated in 1980. He spent time when I came here, shortly after I came here. Dave was a fellow at the Financial Accounting Standards Board. And shortly thereafter, he made partner. That was in Connecticut. He has had, I think of it, and he'll correct me, he always does. I think of an audit practice as two things. One are the clients, and getting clients is called practice development. And one is to run quality audits. And Dave was in charge of quality audits called professional development for Deloitte. And if you think about, well, we'll talk about that, but essentially, what do you have to do to put together a quality audit? More important, how do you get a firm with, how many auditors do you have, Dave?
Well, 80,000 around the world.
To get on the same page. So I think you're very fortunate. Be very few times earlier in your career that you're going to be able to talk to somebody with Dave's background and experience. No questions are off the table. He's allowed to say, I can't answer that, but no questions are basically off the table. It's a chance for you to talk to somebody with fabulous experience. He's still kind of biased, but he's not employed by Deloitte anymore, so he's less biased than he was a year or two ago.
There you go.
So anyway, I think it's a tremendous opportunity, and thank you for agreeing to do it, Dave. And
Oh, you bet, Ted. No, it's great to be here. Is it mine now?
it's yours.
Done with? Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for taking the time. You were going to take the time anyway. Also, I didn't do this morning, but I also need to thank you for your flexibility. I had something come up last week at the last minute. And so I didn't do this last Thursday. And about 10 minutes before the last class, I called Tad, and he answered the phone, and I said, "How you doing?" And he said, "I'm nervous," because he thought I was going to bail on him again at the last minute, but I was just looking for the Zoom link at that point. So we're all good. Let me tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then I'll tell you, and then we'll have lots of time for questions and answers. When we get to the Q&A part, we can talk about anything you want to talk about. We don't have to talk about what I'm going to talk about today. Anything that's on your mind, anything, I guess that's kind of relevant that's on your mind, let's talk about it. So I want to make sure we talk about what's important to you. So I'm going to give you a little bit of my background. I know Tad sent it out, but I'm going to give you the 2-minute version of my background and what I've done, since I left Cal Poly. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the profession during my 40 or so year career. And I do that to set up the real topic that I want to talk about, which is standard setting and the profession's involvement in standard setting. And you really have to understand how we got to where we are today to talk about standard setting. And I do have the one slide that I'll put up later, but I did ask Ted to send it to you because it's pretty busy. And in case you can't see it well on Zoom, I wanted you to have access to it. So I did graduate from Cal Poly in 1980. I also later that year married my girlfriend from Cal Poly. In fact, next week it'll be 42 years since we got married. And I went straight into public accounting out of Cal Poly. And with the one break that Tad mentioned, my 2-year fellowship at the FASB, spent my entire career in public accounting. And so I worked mostly in Silicon Valley. I started in Silicon Valley and went back to Silicon Valley after I spent my time at the FASB. And it was there that I got into the quality side of the business, first as a quality leader in Silicon Valley, then and I came to Southern California, where I live now. I'm in Newport Beach. And was a quality leader down here, and then for the West region. And then for 5 or 6 years, I ran quality for the US firm. And then the last couple of years before I retired last year, I was the global audit quality leader. And in that role, as Ted mentioned, the responsibilities in that role were to interact with regulators and standard setters, to develop and implement the Deloitte audit methodology around the globe, and to ensure that the methodology was being followed through internal inspections and monitoring external inspections and that sort of thing. So we worked a lot with the accounting standard setters, the audit standard setters, and other standard setters in those roles, and then took that information to determine the Deloitte way to do things. I mentioned I retired about 1.5 years ago, and at the beginning of this year, I joined an organization called the Public Interest Oversight Board. It's just a part-time board position, and the PIOB, as they're referred to, there are a lot of acronyms, and if I forget to tell you what one of them is, please interrupt me. The PIOB's role is to oversee international audit standards and international ethics standards that are set for accountants and auditors. and to ensure that those standards are being developed in the public interest and not in the self-interest of accountants and auditors. So it's a board made up of 10 people from around the world, and we meet in person about 4 times a year, mostly in Madrid, Spain, where they're based in executing those responsibilities. So I said I'd start by giving you a little bit of historical perspective on the profession, and the way I tee this up is to say that from 1980 till 2021, I spent roughly 40 years in public accounting. And as I describe it, I had 2 different careers. The first half, or up until 2002, was a period when the profession was self-regulated, and I'll come back to that because it's an important distinction from the current state. And then in 2002, or 20 years ago, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act was passed, and we went into the current period of regulation. So for the last half of my career, I was part of a regulated profession. And so if I go back to that pre-Sarbanes-Oxley audit world, I will oversimplify this, and I'll also make it sound worse than it probably was. But in short, what I would tell you is the profession had really lost its way. The profession has been here to at least as part of the auditing profession to provide credibility to reported financial information for users of financial information, whether they're investors or lenders or the public good, or for other reasons. And really the firms had gotten pretty greedy and had really gone down a road of doing less and less auditing, and the quality of financial information was deteriorating to the point where there were very large accounting scandals at companies, and then a couple that I'm sure you've heard of, Enron and WorldCom, occurred in 2021 or so. And when that happened, Washington did what Washington never does. They agreed on an issue, and this is one that when Sarbanes-Oxley was passed, while I didn't go back and look at what the actual vote is, but it's like one of the only times in recent history where Republicans and Democrats agreed completely. It was almost unanimous in the House of Representatives, and it was unanimous in the Senate to pass the Sarbanes-Oxley bill, which, among other things, introduced the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, or the PCAOB, and began to regulate auditors who worked on public companies in the U.S. So now we've had the last 20 years as a regulated industry, and I would say as a profession, and this isn't just Deloitte, the other firms reacted similarly. We did not embrace regulation in those early years. We thought we knew more than the PCAOB, and were a little offended that they would come along and tell us how to do our job. And so it took a number of years before we accepted the fact that the regulator actually has all of the power and we didn't have any. And we as a profession, including us at Deloitte, really started to work on improving audit quality, changing our methodology and our software and delivery tools to improve audit quality, and to really embrace the mission to protect investors and enable the capital markets. And so as that journey has changed, I think we've really seen a huge change in how audits are executed on, and right now I'm talking about just on U.S. public companies, primarily by U.S. auditing firms, because the extent of implementation of auditing standards does vary around the world, but clearly the U.S. is unique in how it has funded and given powers to the PCAOB to impact the auditing profession, and it has had a significant impact. The number of accounting scandals has dropped significantly. The number of lawsuits related to company failures has dropped significantly. And a large part of that is because of Sarbanes-Oxley and not just the PCAOB, but other provisions of Sarbanes-Oxley that have improved the quality of financial reporting for U.S. companies. What's interesting to me, because I mentioned I worked at the end of my career at a global level, and now what I'm doing on my board is at a global level. And after 20 years, there are a lot of benefits to be seen from the impact of Sarbanes-Oxley and the audits of internal controls and the effectiveness of the PCAOB. And I would say, as you go around the world, every country now has their own independent audit regulator, but the funding of those regulators and the quality of the work that they do and the impact that they have on the profession varies dramatically from country to country. And then with respect to like the audits of internal controls, Japan is the only other country in the world that has required the audit of internal controls. And so while I think that's one of the biggest benefits of Sarbanes-Oxley, it hasn't been embraced around the world, which is a little surprising to me, but it is what it is. So as we've seen the profession change to really, to be reminded of its mission to protect investors and to enable the capital markets, I think we've seen a lot more activity among the profession to do just that in how they audit, but also how we interact with the standard setters and that sort of thing. So now I'm going to actually get to the topic that Tad asked me to talk about, which was standard setting and the profession's involvement. So to do this, now I'm going to share my screen and pull up. This is the handout that you all should have gotten. This is here. I'll show it to you in full, and then I'm going to zoom in a little bit because part of the reason I sent it is because there's no way you could ever read anything that's on here. This is actually a great, I think it's a great tool that summarizes the financial reporting process for U.S. public companies. Now, there are probably 8,000 U.S. public companies. There are tens of thousands of private companies in the U.S. that pieces of this might apply to, but it doesn't all apply to. And then there are global companies that aren't public in the U.S. that have some other regulators and other participants in the marketplace that are involved. But this is a great summary showing from sort of standard setting to the company's responsibilities, to the auditor's responsibilities, and then providing decision useful information to investors and users of financial statements. So this could be useful in some other settings. Other parts of it may be useful in other settings. I'm going to focus, and I'm just going to go and zoom in a little bit here. Well, mostly focused. Sorry, I'm probably, people are getting seasick as I try to do this, but focusing on the left-hand side there where especially the bottom 2/3 there, where we see some of the standard setters that are involved in the process. I'm going to list a number of other standard setters that are missing here that also impact this, but from an accounting standpoint, U.S. accounting standards are set by the Financial Accounting Standards Board, the FASB, and you see that up there. Many U.S. registrants that are based outside the U.S. don't follow U.S. accounting rules. They follow international accounting rules, and those are the IFRS rules that you'll see on the right-hand side there. But those are also can be used in U.S. filings. And then as you go down below, they focus here on the PCAOB. The PCAOB, one of the roles of the PCAOB is to set auditing standards for public company auditors. But in addition to the PCAOB, the American Institute of CPAs also has an auditing standards board, and its role is to set audit standards for non-public companies in the United States. And then there's the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board, which is a global board that sets auditing standards. And those standards, they're called the ISAs, the International Standards of Auditing. are the basis of every major firm's audit approach. So every firm will follow the international auditing standards. To the extent that PCAOB standards or US standards for private companies differ or have additional requirements, they would augment their approach to address those areas as well. So you know, in any of these cases, there can be a number. The point is there could be a number of standard setters involved. And the makeup of those standard setting bodies varies greatly. One of the things the Sarbanes-Oxley Act did when it gave audit standard setting to the PCAOB is that it also said that the 5-member board of the PCAOB could have no more than 2 CPAs on it. So up until that point in time, auditing standards were set by the American Institute of CPAs. They were all CPAs that were on the auditing standards board, and there was concern, and I'm sure valid concern, that those standards were being set to protect the auditor, not to protect the investing public. So this was intended to bring in an independent viewpoint in standard settings so that the focus of those standards was on protecting investors, not protecting auditors. And just as an aside, while the PCAOB was formed 20 years ago, the IAASB, the International Auditing Standards Board, is currently in the midst of a 3-year transition to change the composition of that board so that no more than 1/3 of that board can be practicing auditors. And so they're in like the second year of a 4-year implementation to change out board members and bring in more of an independent view to international audit standard setting as well. So what that might tell you is that change doesn't happen incredibly quickly. You know, if the PCAOB happened 20 years ago and now it's just happening on the international side, this is a total footnote, but accounting standard setting used to also only be done by accountants and set by accountants and auditors until about 50 years ago when the Financial Accounting Standards Board was established and brought in voices from academia and investors and others into the accounting standard setting process. So over time, the auditor's control over each of these areas has diminished, but I think the benefit has been that the quality of financial reporting and the reliability of that financial reporting has improved over that same time period. So I think that's all been good. In addition to some of the standards that you see on this slide, auditors also have to comply with independence and ethics standards, and those are set by the PCAOB, by the SEC, by the American Institute of CPAs, by IASBA, the International Ethics Standards Board, and also in some cases by state boards of accountancy, which control licensing of accountants in individual states. So the whole point of all of that is just to say that there are a huge number of standard setters that impact the world of accounting and auditing, all of which are incredibly important to the auditor, because the auditor, well, one, they need to know how to perform an effective audit, and we audit that financial statements are in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So we also have to have a deep understanding of the accounting principles that our clients are applying. So so there's a lot of information there. You know, you think about everything you have to learn just to get your degree and to take the CPA exam, and you've really just started to scratch the surface. There's just so much more to learn throughout your career in all of these areas, which I think is hopefully is good news, that you don't stop learning when you leave school, that actually what you've done is start yourself on a path of lifelong learning, which I think is great. So in terms of our involvement in standard setting, I'm gonna stop sharing here. Let us see people's faces again. There are a couple of things I'd say in terms of the profession's involvement in standard setting, and as you can imagine, I'll certainly be giving you Deloitte's perspective because that's what I'm familiar with and oversaw. But I know for all of the large firms, they have something similar. And given the number of standard setters and the diversity of standard setting, we had dozens of people in Deloitte in accounting and in auditing and in our independence and ethics groups that spent a lot of their time, if not all of their time, following standard setting and understanding the direction of standard setting and that sort of thing. To the degree that we can be helpful to standard setters, we want to be, and we offer up, we offer up help in a lot of ways. Some of the more significant ways are some of these boards are volunteer boards, like the International Auditing Standards Board, and Deloitte has a current partner from national office that is on the IAASB. Some of these organizations require that you leave your employment and go to work for them full time, and so just within the last few years, at one point in time, the chairman and the vice chairman at the Financial Accounting Standards Board, the chief accountant at the SEC, and the chief auditor at the PCAOB were all former partners from my group at Deloitte, who had gone into those roles to work on standard setting and give back to the profession. So part of how we get involved is by getting people involved, getting smart, deep thinking people involved in those areas. We also do a lot. Each one of these boards has a different form of due process on how they set standards, how they debate issues, and come up with what they call exposure drafts before they have final standards. We will send comment letters on everything that they publish. And really, we would try to make sure that what we were doing was recognizing our role as a protector of investors and not to just protect the auditors. Anything we said that was self-serving would be dismissed anyway, and we probably lose credibility. So we tried to be careful with that. We also did a lot to field test standards as they were being developed, because that's usually the most effective way to understand how effective a standard will be, but also to determine whether or not there are any unintended consequences from a standard. And the sooner you can identify those and address those, the better, so that you don't lead to more confusion after a new standard is issued. And then where appropriate, we would also train our clients in all of these standards, usually on the accounting and internal control side, because they're the ones on the front lines implementing those standards, and we come in behind them and audit them. But we have deep expertise in those areas, and so we would do a lot of training individually and classroom and web-based training and that sort of thing for our clients to help them implement new standards. One of the recent large standards that was issued was revenue recognition, which I understand you're going to touch on next week. From an auditing perspective, and that's an area where we spent years working with clients to help them prepare for implementing the new standard and making sure that the implementation went as smoothly as possible. So that's a lot of what we do in terms of the involvement in standard setting. And as I say, the intent is really to make sure that the standards that get issued are they're workable, that they're implementable, that they achieve the objectives that the standards were set out to achieve. So if they're auditing standards, that audits are actually going to be more effective because of that. And often that means we have to do more work, but it also, is a chance to recognize the way we audit today is different than it was 20 years ago, or even more when some of these standards were written. We have different abilities with technology and data to do things that, we couldn't have even dreamed of back then. So the standards have to continue to evolve to take that into account so that the audit can be as effective as possible. So, and I think, Ted, that's what I wanted to say about standard setting and the profession's involvement. And like I say, for the rest of this time, we're just going to open it up and you can ask anything you want. It does not have to have anything to do with that. with what I just talked about. As I said before, anything, probably profession related, I probably know more about that, but also, I know a little bit about adopting dogs, as we were saying earlier, because we just adopted another dog. So I'm happy to talk about that too.
Bryce?
Hello, Dave. Thank you for coming out,
Bryce.
first of all. I just have a question regarding the standards. Like, how do you determine when you need to establish a new standard when you were at FASB? And then how does that process typically go to get it finalized?
So that's a great question. And Bryce, there's a similar process, whether it's auditing standards, at each of the organizations that's doing that, or at the FASB or international accounting standards. They all have a process where it'll depend on the organization, but usually every 3 or 4 years they will have a strategy update. They'll just update their strategy and their long-term work plan. And that process is really designed to get input, to find out from all the people impacted by, in the case of accounting standards. So whether it's management preparing the books, or investors, or regulators, or auditors, what are the areas of accounting that need improvement? And it could be for a lot of reasons. Revenue recognition was ripe for improvement, because prior to the issuance of that standard, there were actually more than 100 places you would have to go in the accounting rules to find all of the revenue recognition standards. There was no one standard on revenue recognition. So sometimes that's the reason for it. Sometimes, like with the leasing standard, it's, there was we had operating leases before, and they wanted to do away with most of the off balance sheet kind of financing. And so there may be a bias in terms of what the outcome of the project will be. But they'll go through and set that process, and then it really depends on how significant the project is, will determine how long it takes. Revenue recognition took forever. It took way too long. In fact, they should have been able to do that in, less than whatever it was, 15 years or whatever. But like one of the current issues that they just put on their agenda recently was how to recognize cryptocurrency in financial statements. And that will be a project that they will do relatively quickly. And in fact, I think they've already had some of their first debates, and we sort of know the direction they're going in. But it's a relatively confined issue, so they can do something like that kind of quickly, get that guidance out there. And what that will do is then ensure that anybody who has cryptocurrency on their books is accounting for it similarly. And that helps investors, because they don't have to go back and ask each company, well, do you have some on your books? How are you accounting for it? And how does it impact the income statement and that kind of thing. So it really depends on the scope of the project, but throughout the project, they'll do a lot of outreach to make sure that they understand what are the issues that people are concerned about, and see what they can do to address those issues.
Awesome. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks. Ted, you're on mute. Will you? Oh,
My students prefer that.
Ah, okay.
So I'm glad you mentioned revenue recognition. Some of you might remember that table from 321. And, a pet peeve is that's going to be on the next test, on the final, because you can't audit revenue if you don't know what it is. So all those accounting standards you learned in 321 and 320, they're kind of important to us. So anyway, I'm glad you brought that up, Dave.
Well, Ted, if I could just add on to that, I mentioned that if you go into auditing, it's really a place where there's lifelong learning. Because there's just so much information to take in. And frankly, you know, even within auditing, we specialize. I specialize primarily in technology companies. Most of my career was in Silicon Valley. So I had a very deep knowledge of, you know, software revenue recognition and the issues that impacted technology companies. But, you know, I never worked on a financial institution as an auditor. Because it was just not it wasn't common where I was working, certainly, and it was a, you know, entire different body of knowledge, and you just, you know, I mean, other than, you know, the geniuses among you, you just can't know it all. So.
Well, I'm glad you raised that, because one thing I wanted to bring up is, if I don't know, so if I'm on an audit and I don't understand something, where can I go? That's a loaded question. I got to work with Trueblood a couple years.
Yeah.
And so Deloitte has people in Connecticut that know something about everything, right?
Well, that's true. But nobody, or rarely will you ever find that you'll work on an audit alone. And boy, it's, you know, I don't know if this is funny or not. Back when I graduated from Cal Poly, and it was like the Friday before I was going to start work, and I got a call from the hiring manager welcoming me and just making sure I knew what to do on Monday morning and where to go and everything. And I sort of felt this responsibility to let him know that, you know, that I'm going to be there on Monday morning. I am ready to do whatever you tell me to do, but I have no idea what an audit is and what to do on an audit. And so if you think that I'm coming in and I know how to audit, you're going to be really disappointed. And he was laughing at me and he said, of course, we don't expect that. We know what you went through in school. That's why we train you. That's why you're with people. So there are always more experienced people available to you to help you. And sometimes it's right there in the audit room with you and on your engagement team, or it's back in the office with a quality leader or somebody else. But then, you know, part of my job is, when I was running quality for Deloitte, was to run our national office, which had in all the different areas, almost 500 people in accounting, auditing, regulatory, inspections, who, you know, they're, you know, we had somebody who knew about anything there somewhere. And if we didn't, we knew who to call at the other firms or at the SEC or at the FASB to get information, because, you know, sometimes new things come up too. So you know, should never be ashamed or afraid to ask for help or clarification at any point in time. You know, make sure you know why you're doing what you're doing all the time, because that's going to give you a better outcome anyway. And these people have a lot to share with you.
So you have friends at the other firms that you call?
I did. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, in fact, that was one of the fun things when I ran quality for Deloitte. I was on a couple of industry or profession-wide committees through the Center for Audit Quality and at the FASB and at the PCAOB with my counterparts at the other firms. And so we would, especially those of us, the four of us from the big four firms, we would get together for dinner once or twice a year, just the four of us. And you know, I would talk on the phone with one of them, you know, at least every month about something. You know, and sometimes it's, you know, you've got a client that's using another firm and our firm, and the two teams can't agree on something. And my job is to work with my counterpart at the other firm to find a solution. And, you know, sometimes it's just, you know, we're seeing something we've never seen before. Do you want to know how common it is and that sort of thing? But, you know, we don't share competitive information, but we certainly help one another professionally.
Questions?
Oh, I see some hands there. Julie?
Yeah, I had a question regarding the automation of big data that's happening now, this transition, and how that's changing the traditional role of the auditor, like with sampling and designing your audit approach.
Yep.
And if you're seeing an impact on quality, overall quality, due to those technical changes.
Well, I would say, and I've been retired for a year and a half, so I don't know what's necessarily happened in the last 18 months, that that the ability to look at entire sets of population or to look at big data, and if you use the term big data, you almost have to define it, because it can mean just about anything, and it could mean just about everything. I think that those are incredible opportunities for not just for the auditor, but frankly for management to do a much better job in effectively recording transactions and reporting financially and that sort of thing. From the auditor's perspective, and I'll talk about big data in two different ways. If big data is, instead of looking at 60 revenue transactions or 60 accounts receivable or something, I can look at 100% of them and identify all of those that have characteristics that you would expect, and then those that are outliers. That can be very powerful. It can also have a huge risk with it. I may have developed an expectation that transactions should look like this, and so to the extent that they do, I may think there's little or no risk associated with those transactions, when in fact there may be some assumptions I made in coming up with that expectation that could be completely wrong. So it is hugely powerful, but it raises different problems that could arise. In a lot of the test cases that we were using, especially like 5 or 6 years ago, when we could get 100% of the data and work with it, well, a number of things happen. One is, if you have 10,000 outliers, you can't investigate 10,000 items. There isn't time in the audit to do that. So you've got to define ways where an outlier is really something of interest, an item of interest that you want to look at. And but you always have to guard yourself against over-reliance on, just because it came out of the computer, it must be right. And so you've got, there is some kind of a technological bias that people have, that even with Excel, which is, prone to so many errors, it's laughable almost, but it's, that there's, we tend to over-rely sometimes on that. When you really think about big data and where it could really be powerful, is looking at information outside the company to evaluate the company and the assertions that management is making. And that is also, it can be very powerful, because it can either support management's assertions or it can refute management's assertions. They may put together a sales projection that says we're going to grow by 20% a year for the next 7 years, and that's why we don't have any impairments or whatever. And if you know where to find the right data, and you see the technological advances coming that are going to make their product obsolete, or that their product, we had one of the audits that I worked on, one of our audit steps was monitoring, and this was a large, I'm trying to think, well, I think I could, well, I probably shouldn't name the client. It is one of the big 3 auto manufacturers. So it's a huge company, a company you would recognize. One of our audit steps, when we were looking at their reserves for repairs and that sort of thing, was using artificial intelligence to review Twitter and look at complaints about their vehicles, and see if there was anything that came out of that where we were seeing trends that were not identified in management's analysis. And
That's amazing.
and that's just one example, but there are just a lot of examples of ways to look at other information to at least challenge management's assertions. Now we get all hung up as auditors on how good is the quality of that information. If it's on Twitter, it must be right? No. If it's on Twitter, somebody had a free speech platform where they could say whatever the heck they wanted, and it may be true for their car, and it may also be a one-of and not be a trend. But if you're seeing a lot of it, it is at least a basis for going back to management and saying, you know, we're seeing a lot of this. What have you seen? What have you identified? And you know, and I would say in most cases when we would do that, we did not surprise. Occasionally, we'd come up with something management hadn't thought of. We didn't surprise them. They knew, they were aware of the issues. They had already sized it up and knew that it wasn't significant, or it was, and what they would do with it. But I do think that the opportunities for using all of this other data, you know, are really pretty exciting, because they're just ways, you know, where we always struggle with ways to challenge management's assertions, and with the accessibility of data, you know, we have more of an opportunity to do that. One of the other huge obstacles is what we would call data wrangling. All of this data comes in all sorts of different forms, and how do you put it into a form that you can look at and analyze, that you're not going through item by item, because that sort of defeats the purpose if you can't use artificial intelligence or some other means to sort and analyze the data. But putting it, sometimes just getting it into the right format is a huge, you know, expensive task too. So that's a great question, and I think, you know, the way we'll see it impact auditing in the next 10 years will be amazing. You know, it's just hard to say what that's going to be.
We'll probably need more standards on how to deal with that.
I'm sure you will, and you can be sure none of the standards right now address any of those kinds of issues. So that's right. Samantha?
Hi, yeah. I was just curious about in your role as the audit quality leader, what would you say is your most like rewarding experience, or like the coolest accomplishment that you had during the time?
Oh, what a question. Well, I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is, but certainly there were a number of things. Well, I'll pick one. So the last couple of years that I was working, I was the global audit quality leader, and I took that role on, and in that role, I as the U.S. leader, I traveled every week. I was on an airplane somewhere every week. When I became the global leader, I was on an airplane every week. They just were longer flights. You know, I was going, you know, other parts of the world. So this is going to get into the pandemic. So I was in China working on an issue about a day or two before China locked down for COVID. And I came home, I got sick. I went to my urgent care clinic, but they wouldn't test me for COVID because, you know, I didn't meet all the criteria for testing back there at the beginning when there were no tests. But I got over it, and about 2 weeks later, I was in France the day before France shut down. And the following week, I was in New York for meetings when the pandemic was declared, and then the US shut down. So either I was traveling all around the world spreading COVID, or just, you know, incredibly lucky. But what happened for auditors, I mean, we have historically always done our job on site with our clients in their office. And now in March, which is during the peak financial reporting season, we were told by you know, governments and regulators all around the world, we can't go out and audit our clients. And so it raised two very significant issues. One, the economy melted down overnight, although we know in hindsight that didn't last all that long, but we didn't know that at the time. So we had all of these issues about a recession that nobody had thought about for 10 or 12 years, because it had been that long since we had a recession and all the impacts that has. And we had to figure out how to audit remotely. And I think I mentioned it earlier, we had 80,000 auditors who were in the midst of their busy season looking for direction on how to get that job done. And we did work, you know, a team of us worked for the next, I don't know, I mean, 9 months, basically a lot of the guidance we got out very quickly, but we continued updating it to enable our audit teams to continue to audit, to continue to issue financial reports so capital markets could continue to operate. And we had some clients who missed their initial filing deadline, but relatively few considering what we were going through. And we really had to enable all 80,000 of these people to work in a completely different world. And we didn't know how long it was going to last. And I guess in some places we still don't know how long it's going to last. So, so I would say, I mean, there are a lot of things I could talk about that we all accomplished, you know, during those years, but that was one where we were faced with a crisis and you know, figured it out. And also I think what we learned is, you know what, we need to be there with our client a lot of the time when we do an audit. We don't need to be there all the time. You know, we don't need everybody working on an audit in San Francisco or New York to be living in San Francisco or New York when they're two of the most expensive places on the planet. You know, they can also live in other places and get things done as well. And so I think what we, you know, part of how we'll see the future of work change is a benefit of the pandemic. And but a huge part of that was figuring out how to do it, you know, when that was the only option you had. So thanks for letting me talk about that. Now, I will say, now that I'm thinking about that, of course, I'm going to sit and think about that for a long time now. The other thing, you know, every year as we make new partners, I'm always really proud of the new partners and directors that we would make in our group, and you know, just show how talented people were and you know, how you know, their careers were progressing, and that's probably the most fun I had every year, was working on those promotions.
Maddie, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, my hand's up. I was wondering, Dave, if you have any advice for students starting their career in public accounting out of college, on how to find job satisfaction and enjoyment out of like a career in public accounting, and in particular starting in this like more hybrid environment where there's less face-to-face contact.
Yeah. Great question. And some of my advice will be irrespective of the current hybrid work environment. And I'll touch a little bit on that as well. But I think, well, first of all, just, you know, full transparency, I never planned to spend my career in public accounting. I graduated from Cal Poly. I wanted to get my CPA certificate. I wanted to go to graduate school. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but, you know, well, one, I didn't know what a CPA did, and how was I supposed to know whether or not I wanted to do that anyway? So I just figured this was all part of the learning process. What I found, you know, especially when you're with one of the bigger firms, is there are so many opportunities to do different things. And for me, the part of the reason I stayed my entire career, well, at some point, you know, you kind of figure you bought into this and you're going to be around for a long time, but my job would change very, very radically every 3 to 5 years, you know, whether it was being, you know, going from being a staff person to being a manager, or going to the FASB. For me, you know, the firm sponsored me to go and interview at the FASB for their fellowship program. And I'll tell you, taking advantage of something like that made me leave home, made me go out and really see the profession as a bigger picture, and not just my office and my clients and that sort of thing. That changed my whole worldview of the profession and really set me on a different trajectory in what I did. So I think, you know, when those opportunities come along, you know, you just have to take advantage of them, because those are the things that will distinguish your career from somebody else's career, and you'll have the chance to learn the most. And I always wanted to learn and have new challenging things to do, and you know, I get kind of bored if I have to do the same thing over and over again. So you know, those kinds of things were really appealing to me. to do that. You know, with the hybrid work environment, well, let me just say, I'm so grateful that it's a hybrid work environment, because I think the completely remote work environment that we had, especially for the first year or so, you know, I think especially as you're starting out, you really need those people that are right there near you to help you, because you just don't know what you're doing, you know, when you get there, and you need people around to help you. And you can do that over Zoom. And I know teams have done a lot of very creative things, including, you know, being on Zoom all day long, even though they're in different places, so that they can just look up and talk to one another and everything. But it is not the same as being there and going out to lunch together and just being able to chat about things, or overhearing other people's conversations that might impact the area that you're auditing, and that sort of thing. You know, that said, in some places, you know, people, if you're spending 2 hours a day commuting to a client, and, you know, 2 hours in the morning getting there and 2 hours getting home, if 2 days a week you could do that from home, and 3 days a week you could be with the team, to me, that seems, you know, that seems like a pretty awesome opportunity to improve work-life balance, and, you know, make sure you're taking care of yourself in addition to getting the job done and that sort of thing. So you know, I think there are some benefits from it, but I can't picture a world where all remote makes sense when you do what we do, and the relationships we have with one another are so important to getting our job done and doing it well. And really, it's a part of the reason. I mean, you like all of these people. I just want to assure you, when you get into public accounting, you're going to like those people even more. And, you know, there are going to be a lot of people like you that you're going to love spending time with. And if they tell you can't spend time with them, that's not going to be very satisfying, I think.
Thank you.
Sure. Bryce is back.
Yeah, I just want to ask a question building off relationships. Throughout your time, who or like just in general, what do you think was the most influential relationship for you, both business-wise and personally, in your development throughout the years?
Oh, what a great question. I certainly have a number of people that I considered to be mentors, that often for very specific reasons. You know, maybe not one person who I think embodied all of it, but, you know, some people who just were such great critical thinkers that really taught me how to think critically and not just accept what I'm listening to, but to ask good questions and that sort of thing. But I guess if I had to pick one person, that back when, so I was a young partner. I made partner when I came back from the Financial Accounting Standards Board. I worked in the national office for a couple of years. Then I went back to Silicon Valley and was a line audit partner for about 6 years before I went into the quality network. And so I was serving clients, doing audits, you know, working on public companies, working on IPOs. And but I'd also been away from the practice for 4 years. I was at the FASB for 2 years, and I was in national office. You know, I worked as I worked for our head of the audit function, so I wasn't doing audits for those 2 years. And so I came back. I'm an audit partner. I haven't done an audit in 4 years, but I sat next door to the managing partner of the office, who was a great audit partner and old, probably, you know, I don't know, 10 or 15 years older than I am. And I would spend about an hour a day in his office, just talking about what I'm working on and the decisions I have to make, and letting him give me advice. And he was never too busy to sit and talk with me and help me through that. And that was such an important foundation for me, because I did spend most of my career. I mean, I always worked on audits, usually, especially in the last 20 years, as a concurring reviewer, engagement quality reviewer. But having that experience as an audit partner was really important to me to understand what we do as I went on the quality side and set policies and did all those other things. So that was Roy Avondat was his name, or is his name, because I'm still in touch with him. But he was he was just great at taking the time, and very, and it wasn't always work stuff I needed help with, because he also had a family, and his kids were older, and so I could ask him about anything.
Sounds
Sounds
like a solid relationship.
Yeah, well, and like I say, there were people all throughout my career that filled that role, but that was a particularly challenging time for me because I was doing something I felt a little bit unprepared for, and he really helped me through that.
And the people in Silicon Valley still wear bow ties.
They do?
Well, Jeff Sokol.
Oh, well, yeah, I think I think the one of the nice things about being in Silicon Valley is we got rid of suits and ties long before the rest of the firm did. So,
but if I remember Roy correctly, he always wore a bow tie, didn't he?
No, he didn't. Roy always wore a tie though, and he always wore his jacket. He would never take his suit jacket off. And when I asked him why don't you take your suit jacket off? Everybody took their suit jacket off as soon as they got to the office. He goes, well, what did I buy it for if it wasn't to wear it? I thought, okay, well, it did not change my practice, but it was his quirk.
Questions? So when somebody asked Dave about his accomplishment, Dave's last couple of years as head of quality, Deloitte had historically low deviations in their PCAOB inspections. And number one, that's a huge accomplishment. They were compared to the other accounting firms, and they were historically low. And I think back 10 or so years, that was not always the case.
It might have been the other way around. We might have had the most. Yeah.
Yeah, because this is 10 or so years ago, Dave and I had coffee. He always bought, by the way. And he was talking about the rough relationship. You didn't like that word. I don't know a better word. The interactions with the PCAOB were not positive at that time, 10 or 12 years ago. So I really liked what you told him this morning about how that changed. And at the time, I didn't realize Dave was so directly involved at those changes. I should have been able to put two and two together, but as you know, I'm a little slow sometimes. Quit laughing, Michaela.
I doubt all of that, Ted, but I mentioned earlier, we did not do well in those early years being regulated with the PCAOB, and one of my lines that I would use internally at Deloitte is, sometimes you go out and you're auditing a client and they consider it to be a distraction, and and you're taking up their time and they've got a job to do, but I would say that nobody hated being audited as much as an auditor, and because the PCAOB would come in and they would just be critical, from day one. They would just be critical and sort of implying, that you're not a good auditor and that you're not very smart and all that sort of stuff, and we were just offended by it, but it took us a while to figure this out. But once, as I mentioned earlier, once we embraced the fact that they had all the power, and that we didn't, that was a game changer, because then we realized, it doesn't matter how we feel. Nobody cares how we feel. What we've got to do is make some concrete changes that will prove to the PCAOB that we are serious about performing high quality audits. And one of the most important elements of that turnaround, I mean, there were a number, and one of them will be another one of the accomplishments that I thought through in my mind as I was deciding on one. But one of the most important elements of turning around that relationship was transparency. And what I mean by that is that we, rather than wait for the PCAOB to tell us that we couldn't do something well, we increased the scrutiny that we placed on our auditors and our internal inspections, and we take those results back to them and we'd share those with them. And we'd say, here are the things we're finding. Now, we wouldn't just go and tell them, you know, we suck at this. We'd go in with a plan that what we were going to do to improve it, and how we were committed to finding these problems, and we were committed to resolving them and improving them, and that they would see a difference when they came in the next year to review our work. So you know, a big part of it was just getting there ahead of them and telling them what we're finding and what we're doing about it. So you know, point out the problems, but also point out solutions. And the other thing that we did, and we took our time doing this, but we just did a massive rework of our audit methodology. We took about 2 years to redesign that and field test it and bake it into our audit software, and then rolled that out. And it was just more clearly aligned with their professional standards. So we started speaking their language instead of expecting them to speak our language. And so we just we were not pandering to them. What we were doing was understanding that they had control. They were the ones controlling the dialogue here, and we needed to be responsive. And so we chose to be responsive. So it was but it was also a multi-year journey to get the results. I mean, we had several years back to back of profession, you know, by a long margin in most cases, a profession leading results in PCOB inspections, and in large part it's because of the work that we did to change our methodology, but also to change the tone of the dialogue that we had with the regulators.
If you guys don't have questions, I got a whole list of them here.
So oh, go ahead.
You used the word transparency, and I'm thinking back. We had lunch some years ago with Steve Kitson, if you remember, and driving back, I forget what question I asked you, but you said something to the effect of, sometimes I have a reputation of being a little blunt, saying what needs to be said. And I want you all to think, when we talk about transparency, and you know, Tad's lived in this ideal world for the last 35 years, right? I've avoided reality. But when we talk about transparency, the things that need to be said are not always easy to say. And I think when we say transparency, you have to be willing to say the things that need to be said. And, you know, you want to do them as tactfully as possible. But I think so many of us duck away from the hard conversations, and they're almost as important as the easy conversations.
Well, well, the good thing about hard conversations is they're not, there are a lot more easy conversations to be had in life than the hard ones. Unless, you know, your life is, you know, a mess, or you find yourself in, you know, working in a war zone or something like that. I'm sure there are places where it's a lot tougher. But for most of us, it's the accumulation of those pleasant conversations that will give us the right to have the direct conversation when we need to have it. I think, Tad, what I probably told you, and I actually got the nickname, even though I had the reputation at work as well as at home, it was my daughters who said my nickname was Dave Direct, because because especially when my older daughter, who was much more verbal as a teenager, I forget when I say we were arguing, she was arguing with me. I was not arguing with her, because I knew I had all the power, and but she was arguing with me, and so I said whatever I said to her. I did not say it. I wasn't yelling. I didn't say anything nasty, but it was just very direct. And my daughter said, "I can't believe you said that." And I said, "But did you understand what I said?" And she goes, "Oh yeah." I said, "Oh good, okay." That's all. That's what I really cared about, was just that you understood me. but yeah, so maybe it comes a little more naturally for me. I don't think that it does. I think that, I've just recognized that if you really want to make a difference when the situations arise, the ability to have the tough conversations is really important, and figuring out how to do that so that you're not embarrassing people or creating animosity to the extent that you can control it. Can't always, is really important. And there are great tools out there. In fact, there is a book that we bought for every audit partner in Deloitte, probably 8 or 9 years ago, called How to Have Difficult Conversations. And it's just one of those tools that you can have, because each of us we have varying degrees of a need to be liked, and that's totally normal. And but sometimes when that need to be liked gets in the way of doing the right thing, then especially as an auditor, it can be very, very dangerous. And so, having some tools that you can call on in those situations is really useful, because the people it comes easy for are annoying and obnoxious anyway, and they're not really having difficult conversations, they're just being difficult. And having a difficult conversation that's constructive is a whole different animal.
Questions, answers. Bryce.
I was just gonna say, other than being transparent, what do you think some valuable like skills in order for like an auditor to climb up the totem pole?
Great. Well, that's a great question. Well, I think, I think, if you're somebody who takes the time to understand what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing, and you can explain that, whether it's the manager or the partner who comes in and says, what are you working on? And you've taken the time to ask questions so that you understand why you're doing what you're doing, and they have confidence that you understand why you're doing what you're doing. I think that goes a long way, especially in those early years. Being somebody, I've always found auditing is great, and auditing is a very noble profession, and what we do is incredibly important to the capital markets and for investors. But if all we had to do was go sit in a cube and audit all day, and we didn't interact with people, and we didn't have the chance to build organizations and impact people's lives, it wouldn't keep many of us interested for very long. And so the ability to lift up the people around you so that they're the best that they can be is huge, because all of this is done in teams. And so not just understanding your role on the team, but building up other people and their roles, especially as you become a leader on those teams, is just huge. And then I think and this is true, this isn't just, all of these things apply whether you stay in public accounting or go work in industry or go, back to school and get a different degree, I think. But I think, and this last one, I guess you would apply differently, but I think one of the things that I think changes how people feel about work is if they act like an owner. And what's important to the owner, and making sure that you understand that. Now, you may disagree with what's important to the owner, and that's important. It's important to know that too. If you work for an owner who has unscrupulous goals, or is trying to rip off his staff or something like that, you also want to know that. But mostly, to the extent that people have good intentions, you want to understand what's important, and start thinking in that way, because wherever you end up in life, that's going to be one of the skills that will differentiate you from just somebody who went to work and complains about their boss and complains about whatever all the time. But and I guess the other thing is, if there's something to complain about, the question is, what are you going to do about it? So instead of just complaining, what can you do about it? And one of the things I found, at least for me at Deloitte, is if I had a problem with something, people were almost always willing to say, okay, now it's your job to fix it, and give you the resources to do it, and let you, actually, try to make things better. So I think, as long as you're being constructive, I think that's all really good.
Thank you.
David,
Yeah, I just have a couple questions. So first, I want to ask, how did your relationship with clients change directly after Sarbanes-Oxley was put into place? And also, do you think that in jurisdictions which haven't adopted similar internal control standards, that there could be more larger scale accounting scandals to unravel in the future?
Yep. So let me answer I'm going to forget the first question because I'm going to answer the second one. That's just because I'm an old guy, so you'll remind me of the first question when I get back to it. The answer to your second question is absolutely yes, that there are more accounting issues and accounting scandals in jurisdictions where they have not adopted similar types of internal control requirements or even robust audit requirements. Although I will tell you, you cannot audit quality into a company's financial reporting system. You can use audits to uncover poor quality sometimes, not always. But if a company is not committed to providing quality financial information, the auditor is not going to fix that. And it's not the role of the auditor. They don't spend enough time on it. And frankly, if they did spend time on it, they wouldn't be independent because they'd be fulfilling the role of management. So that would never happen. One of the things that I still read all the time, I don't know if through Cal Poly you have access to the Financial Times, but the Financial Times is the London equivalent of the Wall Street Journal. And in there, they write a lot more about accounting scandals and audit scandals in their paper than we do in ours. Now, the profession is seen much more poorly over there than it is in the US. We have a much better reputation in the US. But almost invariably, the companies that they're writing about are multinational companies. And now I don't agree with this, but they definitely have a bias that, the auditors are not doing their job. They're not criticizing management enough, in my opinion. But having said that, they will at least take the time and let reporters spend the time to investigate those stories and tell them. In fact, there's another, I'm going to suggest this just because I thought it was a fascinating thing to read. And I didn't mention this before, Tad, but I don't know if you've heard of the Wirecard scandal, but this was a German payments company that went bankrupt 2 years ago. And it turned out that, there were literally billions of dollars of cash on their balance sheet that didn't exist. And the reporter for the Financial Times who did that investigative piece, and it was really this reporter and the work that he did that brought the company down, just wrote a book called Money Men on the Wirecard scandal. And to me, it was fascinating given my perspective and what I did for a living, because it showed the failing of really virtually all of the elements of the financial reporting ecosystem in play, where it wasn't just the auditor that didn't do their job, although they didn't do their job, but management clearly, wasn't trying to do the right thing. The board of directors was completely ineffective in overseeing management and challenging management. And the regulator, the German BaFin, the German regulator, rather that once this information was coming to light, rather than investigating the information about the company, investigated the reporters and looked for information to discredit the reporters. And so it's just a colossal cluster. Yeah, I don't know how else to describe it, but to me, it's also a fascinating story of, how if people that have all these gatekeepers and people who have responsibilities in the financial reporting ecosystem don't do their job, investors can be screwed out of billions of dollars. And in that case, they were. And in fact, one of the last investments they got was a huge multi-billion-dollar investment from SoftBank, just weeks or months before they imploded. So anyway, now I forget the question, but there are more of these overseas. If you have access to the Financial Times, if you just type in accountancy, I think, or accounting firms or something, they'll just give you, the most recent articles from the last month or two, and you'll see a dozen of them there on issues that they're going through. So yes, I think there's definitely an opportunity for the rest of the world to upskill. Now, as an American, I can say that to you all as we sit here at an American university in the American educational system. When I say those things, when I go overseas, like I spoke at a conference in Madrid last month, I have to be very careful in the words that I choose, because then I'm the ugly American who's just trying to push our point of view on the rest of the world. So it's there's a tightrope to be walked there. Now, with all of that, I did forget the first question. So David, tell me the first question again.
Yeah, I was curious, how did your relationship with clients change directly, maybe on a personal level, after Sarbanes-Oxley was put into place?
It's a great question, and that really evolved over the first 4 or 5 years of after Sarbanes-Oxley, because there had been some information that came out from the PCAOB very early on that the auditor could not assist management in interpreting or applying accounting rules. So the management had to do it all on their own, and then the auditor would come in and audit it. And it took them a number of years to back off on that, and to there are a lot of things the auditor can do. The auditors have a lot of expertise. There are a lot of things we can do to make sure that management gets it right the first time, that don't necessarily represent a material weakness in internal controls and that sort of thing. But it's just part of their journey to upskill so that they record transactions appropriately. So I would say that, so that was one thing where there was just there was a rough time, because we were used to helping our clients prior to that. And now we were just saying, nope, you're on your own. But if you get it wrong, we're going to give you a material weakness, and you're going to have to report that to the public. So that wasn't good. That wasn't helpful for the financial reporting process. And frankly, it made the relationship, pretty stunted. Some other things that came out of it, like the limitation on providing a lot of other services to our audit clients. Frankly, because of the direction everything was going, the elimination of providing all those services was well underway. So it wasn't like that was a big detractor. Although I will say, and this is, true confessions here. I mean, I had, prior to Sarbanes-Oxley, I had a couple of public companies. They were kind of startup companies, but they were public, where the consulting fees to those clients were probably 30 times the audit fees. And every consultant I'd bring out, they'd hire him to do some project, and the firm thought I was wonderful because I was selling all this business, and all of that went away pretty much completely after Sarbanes-Oxley, which frankly it should have. What we were doing before, not only optically looked bad, but it was bad, and who could sit there with a straight face and say I was being completely objective on the audit when I was selling, literally tens of millions of dollars of consulting services every year to this same company. So as far as I'm concerned, while that changed the relationship, it changed it in a direction it needed to go.
Thank you.
You bet.
Dave, I worked in Phoenix, Arthur Young Phoenix, for a few years. You're the only one here old enough to remember that brought us Lincoln Savings and Loan.
Mm-hmm.
When I first came to Cal Poly, I was extremely sarcastic and pessimistic about auditing. I've come to the conclusion that the culture of the firm and the office is essential. Obviously, the culture I came out of was toxic. but especially given what you talked about, hybrid, remote work, how important is it for the students, the young people, to get absorbed by the culture and the ethics and integrity required and expected of them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I will say one thing that I know this is true again, because my experience is limited to Deloitte. I don't know how other firms have done this. But over the last, 10 or 12 years, we've moved more away from local office autonomy to national practices. So they're still operated locally, and you have local leadership and that sort of thing. But local leadership does not have the ability to make decisions and do things. They're a lot of what they have to do, the programs they have to implement, and so forth, are directed nationally. And part of that is to eliminate the diversity in culture. Now, every office is still going to be different, and frankly, as you're interviewing with firms, to the extent that you can detect what the culture is like, that's important for you, because you do want to be in a place where you fit in, and that there are people that you want to work with and that sort of thing. And I would certainly not ignore those signals if you get some that you think are, that didn't seem very cool or whatever. Don't ignore those things as you go through a process of evaluating and that sort of thing. Clearly, and I don't know if this was part of why you asked this, Tad, but certainly, when two of the big four firms have had these cheating scandals on their education, and in one case it's on ethics exams, that's just not good. I mean, it's not, I am not part of the cancel culture. I'm not into canceling a firm because that happened. The first thing I want to know is, how did you detect it and what have you done about it since then? Because, no person is perfect, no organization is perfect. And so I don't expect them to be perfect, but I do expect them to react appropriately when they see the imperfections that come up, and did they voluntarily do the things the right thing and the things they need to do, or did they only do it because the regulator imposed a $20 million penalty and put in a monitor in place and that sort of thing? So I think those are really important points. I think it's also maybe separate from just the culture and that sort of thing. When you think about what you do every day on the job, just remember that, if you're tempted to do something that is not appropriate, or that isn't ethical or whatever, and you think, well, I won't get caught, it's no big deal. Don't think of it that way. Think about what if I do get caught? And I can assure you, in those firms where they've had those scandals, that the tolerance for that type of behavior is less than zero. That if something like that comes up again, they're not asking questions. They're just, saying thank you and showing you the door, because you just don't want to deal with the negative press that you get, and it's not good for the entire profession. It's not good for E&Y, for example, in their recent settlement, but it's just not good for the profession, because it makes we all get painted with the same broad brush usually. And frankly, doing what we do, accepting the remit to protect the capital markets and protect investors requires us to hold ourselves to a higher standard than the average person. And if you're not willing to do that, then you won't fit in long term anyway. That sounded kind of negative. We should have an upbeat question now.
Well, I like what you said, because when I teach the audit report, I say what really matters are those three words: in our opinion. And if nobody cares what our opinion is, we have no value, right? So I encourage them to cherish those 3 words and make sure they protect that the world cares what our opinion is.
Yeah, no, and Ted, I think I mentioned this morning. I don't think I mentioned it in this class, but it reminded me of it. So I'll say it here, especially in those early years of regulation, when people were very unhappy, when our people were very unhappy with the PCAOB and the tone of the regulation and everything. I would try to help people reframe it and think about it differently, which is one of the roles of a leader, is to look at the same problem, but show them the possibility that exists in the midst of that. And I would tell our people often that if what we did as auditors didn't matter, Sarbanes-Oxley never would have been passed. The PCAOB and their hundreds of millions of dollar budget would never have been put in place. And, we wouldn't get all the press that we're getting. But the good news is what we do as auditors matters. And it matters enough that Congress who can't agree on anything, will agree on that. And they'll fund it. Well, they don't fund it. They force public companies to pay for it, but they had to start it, and they have to make sure that it keeps running, and that and all of that is done because investors need that assurance that the auditors can bring to the financial reporting process and to the capital markets. So it's, as painful as it was also good news that what we did really did matter, and it made a difference in society. And like I said, like you said, Tad, if nobody cares about our opinion, that's sort of the death knell. So don't want that.
Well, and something positive. I actually enjoyed auditing. I thought it was fascinating to be able to walk into a company and learn how that company operated, how they made money. I just found learning about the different companies. Now, I was in Phoenix, so we had lots of clients and they were smaller, but it was so fascinating to, as Dave Ward once said, you can ask them almost anything if you're an auditor.
Yep.
So it's a great experience to learn about other companies, I think.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Well, to wrap it up, unless somebody has questions, this worked really well this morning, so I'm going to do it again. Talk about what's important, Dave.
Oh, so Tad did this morning, and he, here we are, a bunch of accounting majors. Well, I'm not an accounting major, but I was once at the old business building, not what I consider to be the new business building, which is an old business building too, by the way. But here we are sitting, and he said, what's important, and the first 6 things that popped into my head had nothing to do with my career or with public accounting or with school even. So I won't get it all in the exact same order, except for the very first item, and that is don't underestimate the importance of a good night's sleep. That everybody needs to have enough sleep, whether it's because you have a test the next day, or you're running in a race, or you're working on a tough audit at year end, or whatever. Everybody needs a good night's sleep, or you're not going to perform at your best. And then you got to spend time with family and with friends. You got to take care of your physical health, take care of your mental health. And I said this just a second ago with respect to the ethical expectations, but I believe that to be a part of our profession, the ethical expectations are higher than they are for the average citizen. And like I said, if you're not comfortable with that, please do something else. But I think work will take care of itself. Work is important. It's important that we provide for our families. It's important that I saved for retirement, so now I can enjoy the time that I have. And that was all very important. And the fact that I did something that was important that had purpose and was important to the public interest and the investing public and the capital markets was a bonus to me. But what was more important to me was seeing people excel and grow and continue to flourish and to see people, you know, when we could get it right, when it came to getting audit quality right, those things meant more to me than, you know, certainly than any title or anything that I had. I was more interested in the results that we could accomplish together. So I'm sure there are lots of other things that are important. Having a dog is really important too. We've had dogs. We've had kids. Our kids are our two daughters are in their 30s, but we've had dogs since before we had kids. So I personally think having a dog or two around is pretty important too.
So I ask you as young people to periodically look in the mirror and ask yourself what's important. And that's going to be different for each and every one of us. But think about it. What's important? What brings you joy in your life? Ask yourself once in a while. The last thing is today being today. I'm looking at some of the smartest young people in California. Dave reminded me this morning, definitely the best looking young people in California, since our daughters are middle-aged now. You know, it's essential that you vote, that you participate in the political process. Right? You're very talented. I think that was a gift. I don't think you really did anything to be smart. Maybe you've used it well and wisely, but you were lucky to be born smart. I think, just think about if you don't participate in the political process, then who's it left to? So I really, really encourage you all to vote. And if you don't know who to vote for, you can call me or Dave, we'll tell you. But it's more important that you vote. Even if you vote different than Tad does, that's not the point. It's really important that you participate. And I know Dave has some thoughts.
Yeah, no, I just to agree completely. Telling people to vote on election day if you missed the deadline to sign up to vote, I know isn't really helpful, but don't beat yourself up. Just take this as a siren call to do this in the future. That it's such a privilege that we get to do it, and it's like you, I'm concerned about the future of our country. It's so divided, and I don't know, voting is not going to change those divisions, but it is going to make sure that democracy works and that we're governed by those who have the most significant voices. So take a part of the process and like Tad said, I'm not going to tell you how to vote. I'd be happy to tell you how I voted, but to me, that doesn't even matter. I think what matters is that everybody participate.
Well, I thank you very much, Dave. Does anybody have any questions, any thoughts before we? Well, I thank you very much, Dave, and hope you have a great day and enjoy the new dog.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I think I did tell the other group this, so I'll tell you, feel free to connect on LinkedIn if you have any questions or anything that you didn't want to ask in front of everybody, pardon me, feel free to send me a question or a note and I'll get back to you. So thanks, Tad. This was fun. I enjoy it.
Thank you.
So we'll see you.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan.
Oh, you bet.
Thank you.
Do we have a review session tonight?
We do, and I got a note here to say something about it, and I didn't. 7 o'clock.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, you're very welcome.
Bye.